I have some 30 years of experience in the development sector. And what I want to do today is to share with you some discoveries that I've personally made in that time regarding development. I grew up in a small town called Kolar Goldfields. And when I was a young student in high school, I was accosted by an old miner who said to me, "You are going to school, so you must be educated in some way. I don't have any education, but there's a question that bothers me to which maybe you have an answer." So then he described that mine workers go down nearly 3 miles below the surface of the earth, blast the rock, get the ore out, and then send it to a smelting plant where there's a process which uses cyanide, and the gold is extracted from the ore, and then it's smelted and poured into bricks. He explained that to me. And then he said, my question is, having got all this gold and converted it into bricks, I am told that it is sent to Bombay, where there is some reserve bank of India, and they bury it underground in the vaults in Bombay. So my question is, why do we take all this trouble of digging this gold out and then burying it again in some other place? Do you have an answer? I didn't have an answer to him at that point, but that's what triggered my interest in learning something about economics. The other reason is the mine workers were impoverished. They were paid very low wages for very hard work. And the other question that occurred to me then was, gold is so valuable. It commands such a high price, and yet the government of India says that, this mine is making a loss. And then I discovered why the government of India says the mine is making a loss, because at that time, the government of India was buying the gold from the gold mine at $35 an ounce, which is the IMF rate, whereas in the open market, where gold is converted into jewelry, it commanded a much higher price. So it seemed to me exploitative of workers to charge them a price for gold which wasn't the open market price. And therefore, I felt that I needed to learn something, so I started off with an interest in economics. And then I decided that economics only takes me so far, and that I needed to understand the world in a more holistic way. And so anyway, I got educated in 5 universities, and you might say I'm a bit overeducated. Following economics, a little philosophy, and then politics, and then I got interested in constitutional law, and so I was in Oxford and then Cambridge. And then my first work was at the Ford Foundation in the New Delhi office, which is where I entered into the development sector, so to speak. And so I want to share with you 3 lessons in the course of my 30 years. The first lesson is that it's important to listen to ordinary people. The second one is that experts, consultants, have a sense of hubris. They think they know a lot, and they often don't know a lot. And some of the things they do result in unintended consequences that, for the most part, are damaging. Occasionally, there might be a surprise, and an unintended consequence might be actually positive. And the third lesson is that it's not enough to focus on one discipline, that it's important, in order to get a good understanding of the world and its problems, one needs an interdisciplinary approach. So these are the 3 lessons in 30 years of work. So how did I hit upon the first one? Long before, Michael Sandel wrote a book called What Money Cannot Buy, I learnt a lesson from tribal people in Wayanad. I was working with the great Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, who's now got the highest honor of this country, who was an agricultural scientist. Now, he felt very strongly that farmers are actually scientists, that you get a strain of basmati by farmers carefully separating seeds for certain qualities in those seeds that they recognize and cultivating them and developing a new strain as a result, which is now what is done in laboratories. And when it's done in a laboratory, the splicing of the gene and inserting the gene into another plant, that's called, science. That claims intellectual property. And therefore, big companies like Monsanto, who do this, genetically modifying plants, have property rights, intellectual property rights, and they make a lot of money. So Dr. Swaminathan felt, look at these tribals. They have conserved medicinal plants that are very valuable, that the pharmaceutical industry uses, by the same process, by weeding out the ones that are not very effective and conserving those that actually have the medicinal properties. So they've done what the rice farmer does. They've done it for medicinal plants. So let's go to Wayanad and tell these farmers, why not create a scheme with the government whereby they would be given some money as their right, property right as it were, for their intellectual work. When we went there, the tribals said to us, sorry, this is nature's bounty. This is something that money cannot buy. And therefore, we don't want any of this. We didn't create this. This is given as a bounty of nature, and therefore, we don't want it. So, that scheme, of course, didn't work, but the worldview of the ordinary person, that tribal person, was very different from the worldview of the pharmaceutical industries and their interest in monetizing intellectual property claims. So that's one lesson. Then I was working with slum dwellers in Bombay. And at that time, there was a judgment of the Supreme Court. The case is called Olga Tellis versus the Bombay Corporation. And pavement dwellers were being evicted by the corporation. And the case was that these pavement dwellers were being sent outside the city in small tenements, and they lost their livelihood because their livelihood is in the city. They are repairing watches, they are repairing umbrellas, they are cobblers, they are, selling fruits and vegetables. That livelihood is gone. So the case was that they had a right to a livelihood that was taken away. And the Supreme Court upheld that. They read into a fundamental right in the Constitution of India, Article 21, the right to life, that the right to life is meaningless unless there is also the right to a livelihood. And therefore, these people shouldn't be thrown out of the city. So the Bombay Corporation had to comply with the judgment. They came up with a scheme where they had plans for rehousing these pavement dwellers. They would contribute some labor, they would contribute some cash as well, in small units, where a little lovely unit with a kitchen, a toilet, and an attic where few people could sleep. So they presented this to the pavement dwellers, and all the men were gleeful. They said, this is great, we accept it, we want this. The women asked, do you want us to live in this flat, or do you want us to go back to the pavement? And the officials said, what's the problem? The women said, what will happen is this. We have come to Bombay from the hinterland of Tamil Nadu. It's been the dream of our husbands that we'll make money in this city, we will go back and buy agricultural land and resume our traditional occupation. And that's been their dream. It's been a pipe dream, hasn't been realized. Now, if you give us this flat, what will happen is that the Mem Saabs who are married to, bankers and those in government or whatever will say, this is an attractive flat, offer some good money and let's buy it off these people. And in no time, our husbands will say, oh, this is very good, we are getting big money. The flat would be gone, sold, and in no time too, the money would be gone. And we'd be back on the pavement doing what we were trying to do before, earning a livelihood. So the officer said, but then what's the solution? They said, listen, we've been living without any toilet, any sanitary facilities on the pavement. Take the toilet out of this flat, put it outside, and say 5 families will use one toilet and reconstruct the flats. We'll have more space inside the flat. We have no problem stepping out of the house to go to the toilet, and no Mem Saab will want to live in a flat that doesn't have a self-contained toilet. Now, this insight could not have come unless you talk to ordinary people, and especially women, because the men didn't get it at all, the officials didn't get it. Another instance of this was I was staying with somebody who was working in the railways. That person said, we put a fast train from Bombay to Madras, a super fast express. All the other trains are crowded, but this one, all the seats are not sold. Why would that be? So I said, let's go to my friend from Kolar Goldfields, Jokin Arpudam, the General Secretary of the Slum Dwellers Federation, and ask him if he will arrange a consultation. Because most of the people going to Madras from Bombay are living in Dharavi, the big slum, and they are from Tamil Nadu. So we had this consultation, and the people said, listen, your fast train reaches Madras or Chennai at 9 p.m., but we are not in that city. We need connections to go to Tanjavur, Kanyakumari, Nagarkoil, Madurai, and there are no connecting trains after 9. You change the time of the arrival of this train in Madras, and you will find the train will fill up. And that's exactly what happened. Now, if they had not consulted, the officials decided, oh, this is a super fast train, it's cut journey time by several hours, and therefore people will take it. It's only when you listen to ordinary people and the beneficiaries of so-called development that you get insights, right? So that's a crucial lesson. The other lesson I was saying is about the hubris of experts. In the entire international development business is made up of, people who are, employed at very high salaries. In the international sector, there's a big difference between the international person, usually from Western developed countries, and the locals. The locals are paid less, the internationals are paid more. And the thing is that, these international experts do not know the culture of a society. They do not know what would really work. They have some ideas of, this is how you should do development. One instance of this is when they decided, nutritional standards must be increased in Latin America. So let us send, surplus milk powder, because milk is nutritious, to Latin America. Little did they understand there's a high degree of lactose intolerance in Latin America. So what did the people do? They said, well, all this milk powder has come, we'll be sick if we have it. So let's use it to whitewash our homes. So you had, buildings caked with milk powder as a consequence. Otherwise, there's another example that I like to give, which is about, let's eliminate malaria. At that time, DDT's bad effects were not known. DDT was considered to be a fantastic pesticide. And so let's use DDT. And in the Tarai area between India and Nepal, it was mosquito infested, forested but mosquito infested. no human being could live there because you'd immediately get malaria. So they organized, the USAID organized aircraft that sprayed the whole area with DDT and eliminated the mosquito. But when they did this, they didn't anticipate what would be the fallout of doing this. The fallout of doing this was no malaria, no mosquitoes, people moved in. So the problem now in Nepal, which is called the Madheshi problem, begins with the clearing of the tarai. So the people from India moved into Nepal, cleared the trees because they could live there, no mosquitoes, and they began cultivation. They cut down the trees. Another consequence of that, the floods which the forest blocked come into the plains of Bihar. To this day, we suffer the consequences of what was considered to be a very good development gesture. Eliminate malaria. How can you quarrel with that idea that it's a good idea to eliminate malaria? But you need to think through what might happen as a consequence, right? That is generally not done. So this often happens in many, many instances where there are these unintended consequences. I'll give you another instance. In Africa, they said, oh, we'll encourage young students from Europe to come and set up orphanages for orphan children and, work as volunteers and take care of them and so on. So they set up orphanages. The consequence was that people thought, oh, very good. These people are coming and spending money. They are like development tourists, really. They don't really know the society and the culture. So then there seemed to be a sudden increase in the number of orphans. Very poor people who could not afford to give an education and bring up their children would hand them over. They are not really orphans. They just thought in this place they are getting good nutrition and education, so let's leave this child there, right? So children who are not orphans were brought in because of this. Now this had not been anticipated. So my plea is, don't stick to the one discipline. Economics is an imperial discipline. Learn about insights from multiple disciplines in order to understand problems. And the most important thing in making any policy, public policy, is a missing element in public policy, which is the public. Thank you.